I'll try to be very brief, but with big hair comes a very big mouth at times. So this is an exercise from the 2009 report on the Select Commission of Higher Education and Global Competitiveness from the executive summary. And it's part of, for me, it's one of the most stark statements out of the entire report, the first sentence especially. Texas is not globally competitive. The state faces a downward spiral in both quality of life and economic competitiveness if it fails to educate more of its growing population, both youth and adults, to higher levels of attainment, knowledge, and skills. The rate at which educational capital is currently being developed is woefully inadequate.
And what report are you reading
This
from?
is from the Select Commission on Higher Education and Global Competitiveness report produced by the state of Texas.
Okay.
So this is from a group of people who were appointed, I'm assuming, by perhaps the governor or some other individual associated with the state. There are a lot of very stark statements, that one being the most significant for me, but some of the more specific elements, Texas among the lowest with educational attainment and per capita income. Texas with a percent of bachelor's degree that's dropped below the national average, as your chart has indicated there.
And so what's the question?
Let me finish. And then the last point here, Texas economy has employed more low-income jobs than it does high-income jobs, with the gap between those types of employments being significant when it's found. So I guess my question for you, if not just a statement that you could respond to, with the challenge that you have asking Texas economy, the Texas education system to do more with less, considering that this report came out in 2009 before there was even a projected budget shortfall, isn't that what Texas higher education has always been doing, more with less?
Well, one could argue or debate the more, and one could argue or debate the less. And so it's relative to others, relative to how much we spend per capita, relative to our cost of living compared to other venues. But absolutely, that's a very important debate. And really, I guess that's the point of my remarks is, given the constraints we are in, what path do we choose? Given the fact that our taxpayers seem to be telling us that we don't want you to tax families at higher levels, how do we get more with less? How do we get more out of the current resources we have? I was over the weekend. I was at church in the hallways, and someone came up to me I didn't recognize, a bearded faculty member, and he said, introduced himself and said, "I'm the faculty advisor at Brookhaven College." And I said, "We just got together and had a meeting, and we found $1 million without even getting to payroll." And I said, "Great," you know. And then he walked on. And so, I mean, this discussion is going on all around the state in community colleges and higher ed. And of course, we're just focusing on higher ed. It's going on in the health and human services area. We've had all kinds of people arrive at the Capitol this week to ask for more funding for the Health and Human Services safety net. And so whether it's public ed, whether it's roads, all these areas, this is a huge challenge, and it's not unique to Texas. In fact, the challenges in other states are even greater because their shortfall, their managing through the economy has been worse, through the recession has been worse than Texas. So for me, the answers lie in more productivity, getting more out of what we have. We all know we're going to have less, and so how do we prioritize? Do we put financial aid ahead of some other special item funding? So these are these very difficult decisions, but I think what we can come away with as a given is we are going to have to be more productive. I mean, we're going to have to, it's like wartime. We're going to have to focus more, we're going to have to get more, we're going to have to ask students to get through quicker. There's people who are talking about dropping the 12th grade because it may not be as value added as investing in pre-K. So I think the good thing is this focus of a recession is going to cause people to think more dramatically about real change and reform and getting the most out of the taxpayer dollar, which is what often private enterprises have to do when they come under some very difficult economic circumstances.
Can we come over here for Paul and then over here?
I appreciate your remarks, Representative Branch. I'm a chairman of a department here. Got over 1,000 students. We have a top 10 program we've developed over the last 14 years with less money than any other program similarly in the United States. And so, we've been doing this efficiency, revisions over the last decade plus. I know exactly where all our dollars go to. With the cutbacks that we had to go through from the last year, in anticipation of this, we had to cut 10% of our classes. We cut instructors. There's really no possibility of online instruction and the sort of stuff that we do. And I'm wondering, if the legislature keeps cutting back higher education, if there are tuition restraints, isn't this an unfunded mandate? Because we were supposed to be teaching 50,000 students. I mean, I understand what you're saying in terms of efficiency, and we make do with what we've got. But in terms of looking at our own budget, there isn't much we can do besides cut more at this point. And this is what we want to do with higher education in the future?
Well, I guess in your institution, you got one way to look at this is that the amount of general appropriation funding that comes from the legislature is become a very much smaller percentage. So this whole discussion relative to University of Texas, we may be talking about 15% of your budget. At other institutions, UT Brownsville, it's a very dramatic discussion because you may be talking about 80 to 90% of their budget. So to lay all the leanness on the legislative appropriation in your institution is probably not appropriate. Remember that all these tuition dollars come to universities. These are public funds that are dedicated. So when we're talking about cutbacks here, we're not talking about cutting back the tuition that comes in to each university when a student signs up, whether they're paying financial aid or using some other source of revenue. So in your case, you know, it's probably more a competition among how to allocate resources within the University of Texas at Austin, and between, and I don't know, you can tell me which department or, you know, why you can't do more things with technology, but I mean, I think it's what it's all about in most of life. We're competing for priorities and for resources, and at some point we're looking for ways. The example of the Longhorn Network, we're looking for ways to find new sources of revenue, attract private money, find new ways. More students come into your department, therefore more tuition dollars. So I think you know, if you're looking for what's the best way to expand your particular program and bring more resources toward it, I think you have to make it more attractive to private giving, more attractive inside the university, to have more funds flow your way, more momentum, more students, more faculty. And a lot of those things, you know, you have to spend money to make money, I gather. But at the end of the day, it's a competition among what this university is going to fund in terms of the education menu. And you're, you know, fighting for your space on the menu of opportunities or areas that we're going to offer educational experience.
It just seems that, again, this is a revenue problem. I understand what you're talking about. I mean, online teaching seems to be a panacea. That's great for gigantic classes. I think most teachers would agree that if you're not teaching somebody specifically in the classroom, especially hands-on courses at the film department, you can't teach these classes this way. Again, we're not against efficiency.
Yeah.
Not at all. We're not against competition. We're not against trying to raise money into the private sector. But it puts us in a very, very difficult position to be able to say that there are efficiencies that we haven't thought of to be able to teach these courses. And these kinds of cuts do have consequences. Now, again, if the state is willing to be able to take that,
what's your department?
it's the film department.
Film.
You know, and so it's very difficult to teach any kind of production course online. You know, it's
Since if these are your guys filming, I'm going to be really nice to you.
don't know. But it's just like I said, it's sort of like, I look at this, and especially with the margin tax problem with the balance with the property tax cuts, it just seems to me when I talk to people in the legislature, this is as much a revenue problem as anything else. And if we're going to expand, especially with the increase, because the majority of the increase in our population is working class Hispanics. I mean, 25% of our department are Hispanic students.
Yeah.
Most of them are first generation, and they're on financial aid. I mean, we're serving the state of Texas. I mean, it's a depressing view at this point. Now, maybe of course we'll figure something out in the future, but it's.
Yeah, and what a lot of the reformers will say is, some answers are we're teaching, we're teaching too many subjects, and so some people say, I'm not sure I agree with a lot of some people say we need to focus on more core subjects, and have less, be deeper but narrower, and there may be something to that, but ultimately, I think also we have to go through this process, and going through this process, we're going to educate. I think headlines and editorials and letters to the editor and these sorts of discussions, we're going to educate the citizenry. And at some point, the citizenry may say, okay, it is a revenue issue. And I'm willing to invest more in education, so tell me what the best revenue sources are that we as a collective state can invest in. And I don't think we're there in terms of the perception I talked at the beginning. I think the sentiment out there is that we're not efficient enough. In fact, two polls that were done after the election, one by the 5 largest newspapers in the state, and one by a well-known pollster here for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and I looked at the questions of the Basleys poll. Both said, that the public said, cut higher education first. They were given all the different groups we looked at. And so there seems to be, if you buy into these polls, there seems to be a perception that higher ed is not as efficient, and either that means because we haven't done a good job selling the efficiencies and the value we do have, and I think there's something to that, or they're right and we can be more efficient. Maybe not in your department, but in other areas.
Thank you for coming, sir. First, let me say I don't think they polled any higher education students in that. But looking at
You
the
guys
bills,
don't answer your phones.
they didn't text me. Looking at the bills that are filed, a lot of them that I'm seeing are conservative, social conservative bills. The bills on the governor's emergency list, voter ID, I'm sure immigration will get on there, sanctuary cities, the sonogram bill, which is an intrusive government if there ever was one. So these bills that I'm seeing, what kind of things is the legislature going to do to ensure that these things are not passed requiring more government intrusion, more money put aside for these things, when we're already trying to look for more money to just keep up with the growing population when it comes to education, health, and human services? So what kind of things will the legislature do to ensure that these social conservative, more government, more money does not get passed before we take care of education?
Well, obviously there's a debate about whether those are big government or small government, or whether securing your border is a federal responsibility. But if it's not being handled by the federal government, then the state needs to step in, and that's a wise use of taxpayer dollars. And a lot of our citizens are telling us that is how they want us to use some dollars, and to help secure the border, because that ultimately reduces costs on hospitals or education and other systems. So a lot of those, there's a debate about whether or not they're big or small government, or whether or not they are cost more money or actually bring more revenue to the table. And the governor chose those to highlight, I gather, because he feels like that he's hearing from his constituency after having run statewide that there's a priority among people he's hearing from to put those on. It's his prerogative as the governor to call for these items as emergency. All that means is that we can take them up in the 60 days, and otherwise the Constitution says we can't take anything up for the first 2 months.
I want to ask one last, actually, why don't you go ahead?
I think one of the main problems isn't necessarily the amount of people getting educated, it's the quality of people that are out to get educated. I know a lot of people that are in college that just aren't mentally mature enough to be in college, so they don't do as well. They get C's and D's in all their classes and just float by. And I mean, maybe they need to be out in the workforce for a few years before they go to college, or do a few years in community college. Or I mean, I know my little brother, he's doing community college right now. He only takes 9 to 12 hours a semester and does work, and he just takes that time to mature. And I feel that it's a waste of taxpayer dollars to fund these people going to college that aren't necessarily even ready to be going to college. And I mean, I think there should be more standards on how well you have to do in college in order to receive some money and funding for that as well.
Well, then you'd probably like the Texas grants legislation, where you add, in addition to need, that there has to be some evidence of preparation or college readiness, so that the point is, if you have 2 needy people, equally needy, right now our system says whoever punches the button first, they get the money. And the proposal is, you have 2 equally needy people, the person that's more likely to succeed and get a degree that doesn't mean we don't fund the other person, but we fund this person first. And if there's money to spare, then we fund that person. So we have a system right now. It's sort of a race to the courthouse is the old term, and the proposal is to favor the person who is needy and college ready. So you'd probably like that approach. If you want to come down and intern in our office, Sarah can probably give you an extra desk in the higher ed committee.
I'd like to take host privilege and ask you one last
All right.
question to close it out.
This is the softball coming in right over the
right.
plate.
I think it is. Well, I mean, it seems to me it's interesting that, underlying Paul's comments and a couple of the other comments and a lot of the things you've said, is this a revenue problem? Is this, some other, in your sort of reading of the poll data, is this a problem of people sort of being critical of efficiency in higher education? You talk to a lot of people about higher ed. You're clearly trying to lead it. It feels to me sometimes in Texas that this is a cultural problem, that it's not, that you could read the poll results another way, and we've gotten similar poll results in the polling we've done here at UT, that it's a problem of people really just not prioritizing higher education or reading something negative into higher education so that, do you feel that way ever when you talk to crowds and you see the attitudes about higher education in the state?
Well, I always remember this sort of USA Today survey from a few years ago, and someone asked the question, this was when the economy was a little stronger, and so the question was, what would you be willing to have your taxes raised for? And then they asked a series of things, and the only one that was positive was education. And so to me, I think as a parent, think if someone came to me and said, I have a really good investment, and could you give us a little more in order to do pre-K and invest in science tells us that the way the brain develops, if we could do more before kindergarten, that would be a really good investment for the future. Or we've learned more about public ed or higher ed, and we're really doing some stuff that's really going to ensure our future. Would you be willing to? So to me, education has a compelling case. I think history tells us that education, and often free education, whether it's the GI Bill after World War II, it will pick your illustration that if a society will educate its youth, it comes back to you. It's almost self-interested because that education comes back to you in enlightened citizenry, in taxpayers, revenues, and so I'm a real advocate of investing in higher ed. But what I have to manage is a perception. If you have a perception of lacking value, your point, whether that's cultural or whether there's a perception that there's empires being built out of bricks and mortar, and we ought to be focused more on digital education or digital universities. So I think higher ed's at a tipping point, and I think there's probably some confusion or different points of view that we may not be going in the right direction in higher education, and that, to the gentleman's point, that there's a lot of holidays interrupted by exams. For some groups and others, it's a real struggle who are working and they can't get through community college for 10 years because they're a single mother working, trying to get their education. So I think a lot of it's how the respondents or the public views education, whether they value it. And so I think at a minimum, we got to get more out of what we have, and we have to do a better job presenting to people that this is a job creation machine. University of Texas, there's more venture capital in Austin 2 years ago than Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio combined. That's not because there's a pink building south of here. That's because there's 40 acres plus and this brilliant place of human capital that everyone wants to come in here and invest in the knowledge and the technology that's spinning off this place. And so higher ed has to do a better job of selling the near-term job creation, economic development, research benefits, as well as, if we don't do this, I fear for our future. Look at Michigan. Michigan 50 years ago never thought it would be on this downward spiral and trajectory. They had the big three automakers. They were riding the crest. They were the economic muscle of the country. And look at Michigan now. Texas, it's not a given that we're going to be the dominant state. I mean, it's up to you guys in 20 years, and 10 years, and 30 years to make sure we are still a dominant state. because why? I think we all think it's education. If we have an educated workforce and a knowledge-based economy, we're going to compete with China, we're going to compete with India, we're going to compete with other states and countries, and we're going to do well. But if we, so to me, I think it's as much on the merits being more productive and efficient, and I think some schools do better than others. I think it's also messaging the efficiency and productivity that we do create.
Thank you very much for
You
coming.
bet. Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Thank you.